This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com. www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. What's real here? We're talking about why did Jesus Christ enter the stream of humanity, Yahovah of the Old Testament? He happens. It's what Jehovah, to put it in the hardened Anglican form. Yahovah. Some Protestants say Yahweh. I believe it does have 3 syllables. He happens, enter the stream of humanity, the stream of Adam's race. By the way, humanity is related to the word humus, which means dirt. Isn't that what God said? I made you out of clay and I'll call you mud. I made you out of Adamah and I'll call you Adam. That's really what it, well, I'm stretching the language a little bit, but not much. 100 pounds of clay. Well, why did Jesus Christ come? I'll tell you why he came. He came to establish, to undergird is the better word, the trust settlement that God had settled way back there in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, with our grandma and grandpa Eve. And the nation Israel, particularly the tribe of Judah, God tasked them with the deliverance to the rest of mankind of the Messiah of Adam's race. And they did. They tried to stop it by killing him. And by their very dastardly deed of trying to murder, and they did do it, and he let them do it, murder God in human flesh, the nation Israel fulfilled God's ordained purpose as the priests, the nation of priests of Adam's race, to deliver up on our behalf the sacrifice that paid for our law breaking, our sin, and safened us eternally from hell. But why did he do that? Because he's a nice guy? Oh, it says he loved us, and that is the definition of his love for his people, the rest of mankind. Remember, Israel exists for the benefit of all mankind. All mankind does not exist for the benefit of whoever Israel is. And the identity of those people is lost. God said it would be lost. We have no evidence of who blood Israel is right now, but we do know this, that God does have a nation Israel, and he ordained them for our benefit. The rest of the nations, the Gentiles, to use the old Greek word, which means nations. The Israelites are part of the Gentile world. They are a nation. Gentile means nations. Goyim in the Hebrew, plural, masculine, nations. Israel was one of those nations. I can't overemphasize that, because the evil empire will turn that around and say, no, we exist for them. We have to support them. No. It's the other way around. And God proved it. And the Messiah of God was given for our benefit for this reason: God's glory, not ours. That's the first question of the Westminster Confession. What is the chief end of man? The Catechism. What is the chief end of man? Answer, 2-part, to glorify God, and the result, to enjoy him forever. That's summing up the reason the Messiah came into the stream of Adam. To glorify God so that we could enjoy him forever. But there's more, a lot more. God established a trust settlement with every tribe and every tongue and every nation, and he divided the land of this earth up between the tribes, the tongues, and the nations. And he says, here's your parcel of real estate. Live on it. It's entrusted. You're the beneficiaries. Live on it. according to my terms. And if you persist in not living on it according to my terms of land tenancy, I'll cause the land to vomit you out. And we have plenty of examples of that in the Bible. And that's the words he uses, vomit you out. He did it to our Grandpa Eve. What did he do? He gave him a parcel of real estate, and then he committed knowing sin against God, and God threw him and his wife, our grandma and grandpa, out. God gave land to Israel, Genesis chapter 15, the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob. And what did God do when they refused to follow God's standards, their conditions of land tenancy? It's not their conditions of, not necessarily conditions of salvation, but it's tied into it, conditions of land tenancy. Tenancy. When Christian folk got to America, the people that lived here were shot through with sodomy, pedophilia, cannibalism, murder, deceit, deep drinking, once they got the booze, high-handed gaming. And according to the Bible, when a people live for nothing but that, they enslaved each other, had been doing it for centuries, murdering each other. When that disorder occurs, not according to God's terms of law, God will, he's the landlord, he's the allodial landlord, he'll change the tenants. When the Iberians got to Britain, they did that. God sent the Celts and displaced them. The Celts had a policy of extermination. They tried to exterminate the Iberians. Many of them landed on the island of Ireland. Not all of them. But then the Celts, they got so that they weren't following God's conditions of land tenancy. And here come the angels, the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons. And they displaced them, drove them to the extremities of the island, Cornwall, what is now Scotland, Wales, the worthless land, the mountains, the moors. And the Anglo-Saxons lived there. They had a policy of extermination, but they ran away into the mountains and just left them alone. And then after that, the Normans came and had a policy of extermination of the Anglo-Saxons who had taken up the Roman toga, the Roman bath, the ways of the Romans, the effeminacy, the homosexuality, and God allowed the Romans to displace them. And the Normans, not the Romans, they were Romanized, yes. The Normans had a policy of extermination, tried to exterminate the Anglo-Saxons. You say, that's brutal, Brent. You bet it is. I said, God's not playing games. Let's get serious here. It is a fearful thing, says the New Testament, book of Hebrews. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Be careful. Okay. So God gives us conditions of land tenancy. Has he given those to us? You better believe it. He's given those to us. This is the trust settlement of God. What are the conditions of land tenancy under God's deed? That's the book of Deuteronomy, and his trust settlement. The Bible unfolds the trust settlement. That's what it's all about. Jesus Christ came to secure that trust settlement of land divided up among Adam's race. That's the story of Christmas. That's the reason for Christmas. That we would have a land that the Lord our God has given us, that we would love that land so much that we would not pollute that land by disobeying God consistently on this land. His law, his will. And he expresses it by prototype to that nation Israel, to whom he gave a land, and he gave to them after he had sworn the land to them He brought them out of bondage in Egypt, and he said to them, here are the 10 first principles of behavior. And to violate these 10 first principles, you do it enough, my wrath, the cup of my wrath starts to fill. And when it gets to a certain level, bang, I draw the line and I drop the hammer. Whatever else happens, whatever else others do, I fully suggest, I beseech you, by the mercies of God, let's learn these 10 principles, what they really mean. Let's go over them. Let's know them so much that they bibble in our blood so that we will naturally do what they say. If you're born from above and you learn them, the spirit in you will want to do them. Let's look at them. We looked at the first one. Noah, chapter 20 of Exodus, verse 3. This is called the first commandment. Now, I hasten to add that Rome, the Roman Church, the Lutherans do not number these commandments the way the Protestants do. Why? Because they're idolaters. That's why. And they want to get rid of this commandment. They want to water it down that says, thou shalt make unto me no graven images. Long story behind that. I don't want to get into it because it takes away from time we could have talking about these commandments. I take enough rabbit trails as it is. Let's just stick to the book, forget the stupidity, and move on. No other lawgivers carry on for you up against my faces. That's the first one. The King James says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Before me? Well, that means before my faces. That doesn't mean thou shalt have no other gods that are preeminent to me. That's the way the King James sounds. Although that is true, that's not a false statement. That's not exactly what it's saying here. What it's saying here is when you come to worship God, you come into his presence, and Jesus Christ, the Messiah, has made the way. He has. That's the way you come to him. You don't come that way, you don't come. I am the door, he said. You got to come through me. No man comes to the Father but through me, he said. And when you come in by Jesus Christ's righteousness, not yours, you do not entertain the idea of any other mediator between God and man, as I said before. No, not the Virgin Mary. No, no saint. No favorite professor from college. No, not the Supreme Court of the United States. No, not the present day prophet of the Mormon Church, if you're a Mormon. No, not Joseph Smith. Not Bigamy Young. No, none of those. Not Mary Baker Eddy, Patterson, Glover, and Fry. I think that's most of her husbands. I'm not sure. Not Judge Rutherford of the Jehovah Witnesses. Any prophet, he think he's a prophet. Key to the scriptures. None of that. There's only one lawgiver for God's people. And he won't allow you to entertain thoughts of any other. So when you come into him, you don't bring any of those up against my faces before me. Verse 4. This is what we call the second commandment. It's the second outcome standard. It's not a commandment, as I'd said the last few weeks. There's only one commandment among the 10 commandments, only one that is in the imperative form of the Hebrew verb, and that's the fifth. Honor thy father and mother. And if you'll notice, that one is worded different. The others say, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. But that one, not all of them, but say that, but most of them, I think. I have to go back and look, but they're framed in what we call, in the English, a future indicative, just a statement of fact. If I said, well, I remember people saying this to me, if it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, paint it. I was taught that. If it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, paint it. And they'd say things like this: if it moves, you will salute it. Now, is that a command? Well, not strictly, no. If I just said salute it in English, that's a command that's in the imperative mode of the construction. Salute it. But if I say you shall salute it, that's a statement of future fact that you will. Just rest assured you will. That's the way the Ten Commandments are. They are statements: thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, uh, thou shalt not murder. You won't do it. That's what they're saying. That's what it's saying. Those translations in the future indicative like that are good. But I put them more to the point with the Hebrew. You make for yourself no whittled out, graven, carved lawgiver. You make for yourself no graven, carved lawgiver. I'm going to camp here a little bit. I'm going to read the footnote that the Winterized Version has here, or what I can read of it. I don't think I have enough time. It's a long footnote. God has made man out of his holy imagination, and he utterly forbids man from returning the compliment. Let me repeat that. God has made you and me out of his holy imagination, and he utterly forbids us to return the compliment. We are not to make an image of God out of our imagination. Image, that's the same root word as imagination. You imagine it in your mind and you make what you imagine. God forbids that of him. Pictures of Jesus, crucifixes, pictures of God the Father in the chapel in Rome. Michelangelo, he's got a picture of God. He's God the Father creating the man. He's got his finger out, and Adam is about to touch his finger. The Bible forbids that. That is idolatry. Period. Clearly, from what this says, a man will do things like that even when he knows better. You got that kind of stuff in your house, get it out. You got that kind of stuff in a church, either get it out or don't go there. There's a tradition and the proper biblical tradition of Protestantism that we don't do that. When Elizabeth I was put in office, her first official act was to order that all churches in England strip the walls and ceilings bare and plaster them white. Get rid of all the Jesus junk. Idols of Jesus are junk. Get rid of them. The Lutherans love them. The Catholics love them. The Romanists, see, almost did it. The Romanist loves them. All false religion is ultimately idolatry. We here in America have a culture of not doing that. In Scotland, they took them all out of the cathedrals and churches, all the icons, that's two-dimensional images, pictures, all of the idols, that's three-dimensional likenesses. They piled them in front of the cathedrals in all of Scotland and burned them within 2 weeks at the behest of a milkmaid woman. She wasn't a maid, might have been an old maid. Her name was Jenny Geddes. She went to church at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh one Sunday. She was so poor, they wouldn't let her sit on the pews. In those days, you had to pay. It was crowded. So she took her three-legged milking stool. She took it to church so she could have something to sit on over along the wall, which she did. The preacher, the man of the cloth, whatever he was, he stood up and started reciting the Roman Mass. Katie barred the door, and Jenny wasn't going to put up with that. She stood up and screamed out in braid Scots. I try to remember the exact words. I can't say it like they say it, but I'll try to come close to it. How dar you speak the moss in my lug? How dar you speak the moss in my lug? Lug, that's the Scots word for ear. How dare you recite the Mass in my hearing? And she took her milking stool and heaved it at him. Conviction. Should she have done that? Well, that's questionable. But God used it. Jenny Geddes is probably the most famous woman in Scotland for a few centuries. Wee Robbie Burns, the favorite son of the Scottish people, named his horse Jenny after her. I even named one of my daughters Jenny, by the way. She's lived up to it, I'll say that for her. Jenny, oh, I found out later, the word Jennifer is the same word as the word winter in two different dialects. Well, there are three dialects: Guinevere, Jennifer, and Winter. All mean the same thing. So when I named my daughter, she had two names that meant the same thing in different dialects, but I hadn't figured that out yet. Found out later. We just call her Jenny, like Jenny Geddes. Well, God has made all other living things on land, all things seeable in the skies, and enjoins man by exact definition of law in the Bible. He fleshes this second standard out from making likenesses of visual art as aids to worship of him. See further, generally, this Common Lawyer's Bible, Appendix 80, named Imagination, Man Made in God's versus God Made in Man's Image. Briefing the history of visual images use having crept in among God's people after the first coming of Jesus Christ. I got a lot more to say about it here. We'll look at it next time. This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com. www.commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.